The second secret of Fatima asks for the consecration of Russia. And Timothy and I today are going to discuss, was Russia consecrated? Why Russia? Why would the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, want Russia consecrated? We're going to look at the history of Russia, the conversion of Russia, the fall of Russia through communism, and then this question relating to Our Lady of Fatima. And really, Timothy, the most forgotten of the three secrets is the second part of the secrets of Fatima. So, Timothy, co-host, welcome back. Let's just begin with the conversion of the Russian people.
Yeah.
You had mentioned in a previous video when we were talking about Fatima how these kids didn't even know what Russia meant when Our Lady spoke to them.
Yeah, it's what we'd call evidence by ignorance. The three kids who were 6, 7, and 9 literally didn't even know what it proves that they were imparting a message that was not their own, because they had no clue what Russia was, what several aspects of the geopolitics entailed by this were. So I remember it was Lucia, Sister Lucy, the eldest of the kids, who thought that Russia was an unfaithful woman, judging by the parsing of the Virgin, who had told her, Russia, will spread her errors throughout all the world. Literally, this is evidence of ignorance. She's imparting a message to us, Lucy, that she didn't even fully understand. She had to go read in a book. I guess first learn to read, right? Because none of the Fatima seers read, and then come back and eventually probably learn what Russia was and the large place it would play in geopolitics.
Yeah, and I mean, it's we just finished talking about the Youth Synod in Rome. This is kind of the first Youth Synod. There's no bishops. It's just Mary and three kids.
Right. Right.
And they're talking about basically the next century of geopolitics, of theology. I mean, the first vision, which we already covered in part 1. By the way, this is a 3-part series. We've already done part 1. This is part 2, and there'll be part 3 on the three secrets of Fatima. The first part's really theological, and it's about hell, and that there is a hell, and that people do go to hell, and they saw people in hell. And we discussed all that before, and the errors of Balthazar in the last century. But here we're turning to the second secret, and I want to read it before we get into the history and whatnot of what Our Lady said in this second secret of Fatima. She says, quote, and Tim, interrupt or jump in at any point if there's something you want to talk about. She says, "You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart." And we had mentioned before, like Our Lady leads with hell. She leads with bad news. But she doesn't just leave the kids there. She says, in order to save them, to save these souls, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart.
Which is what Jesus did throughout all the Gospels. Here's the malady. Here's the remedy. And it has something centrally to do with devotion to Mary, which a lot of people don't like that. Protestants.
Right.
Comes from you.
But God shows, and God wants to establish this devotion through her and to her Immaculate Heart. Why don't you think she said devotion to Jesus? I mean, a lot of Protestants or even Catholics are going to ask, well, Christ is the apex. He is, the Eucharist is the source and summit. Why wouldn't she come and establish that? What is unique about, we're going to see Russia here, but also Mary and her heart?
To Jesus through Mary. Right. So, I mean, why is, Protestants will point out that Jesus is called the intercessor, and why we don't need any other intercessors. Well, there's this intercessory chain that, for whatever reason, human nature is bound up in. We like mediators. I think what this involves ultimately is the idea that mediation helps us in terms of relation. And just as Jesus helps us relate to the Father, Mary, who's full of grace, who's ever gentle, ever clement, like the Salve Regina, the most beautiful song tells us, she helps us in terms, not that Jesus isn't gentle or clement, but she's ever feminine, which is also important with the Russia message, truly feminine.
Yeah, I mean, we are Homo sapiens. We're rational animals, right? We have the image of God, but we have nostrils and kidneys and toenails like other animals. And in the animal kingdom, we are mammals. which means we have this unique relationship with our mothers from infancy. It's programmed into our hardware and our software of who we are.
That's right.
You know, and so grace builds on nature. So to think that when Christ redeems us, that this matriarchal or this motherly role in nourishment and in life and in spirituality would be absent doesn't make any sense. There has to be that feminine, there has to be that mother, there has to be that mammal element to being not just human, but being a redeemed human. And Our Lady at the foot of the cross stands in that role. She's not God, she's not a goddess. We don't worship her, but she is elevated in the highest point in creation to be a vehicle, like you say, of love, of mercy, and help us relate more to Christ crucified because she's standing there.
Right. She's precisely. So she's ever feminine, and she's the vehicle, the Ark of the Covenant, the new Ark. And of course, this means something really particular in Christian typology. It means that she'll be the easiest to relate to. She is the best example of a human woman, just as Jesus is the best example of a human man. And of course, the virtues entailed by these things, there's some overlap. Honesty is honesty, but there is male virtue and there's female virtue. And Jesus is the pinnacle of male virtue. Mary is the pinnacle of female virtue. They do not act the same at all. When you see it best, no surprise, when you see the interactions between Jesus and Mary. You know, he acts way differently. He countenances her in a disparate way than she countenances him.
Right. Just as all of us have a different way of relating when it comes to our mother or with our wives versus our male friends, et cetera. Now, a lot of people are going to hear this and you'd be like, oh, you guys are such, chauvinist or whatever. But hey, that's just human nature. It's just how it works.
That would be. That's how it'd be. Yeah.
That's how it'd be. Okay, so I'm going to continue the quote here on Second Secret of Fatima. She says, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Sacred Heart. If what I say to you is done, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. The war is going to end, but if people do not cease offending God, a worse one will break out during the pontificate of Pope Pius XI. When you see a night illumined by an unknown light, know that this is the great sign given you by God that he is about to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church and the Holy Father. Let's pause there.
The one interesting thing I only learned this past summer reading The Fourth Secret by Antonia Socci, which we've discussed at great length. When she describes the month in which the war will break out in terms of the pontificate of the new Pope Pius, she actually gives what is technically a prediction that's off by 2 months. And when people, so this ends up being tremendous evidence by ignorance. Just like I'm talking to any of the remaining Fatima skeptics out there. It's hard to believe they exist, but they do. There's so much ample evidence here, plenary evidence. The reason that this turns into evidence by ignorance is because she doesn't actually reveal the first and second secret until after. It's a post hoc revelation. Right. She didn't say it in 1917. She didn't share it. She sat on these secrets publicly to a lesser extent, less long than she sat on the third secret. But a lot of people out there might not know that the first two secrets, even though they weren't mega secret.
In 1917, she didn't, put out a memo or encyclical. She was a kid.
She didn't tweet about it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I don't know why. That's weird.
Yeah.
She should have tweeted about it. But so this was released after the message had been the content of the message had been instantiated. So remember, this seems petty, but it's not. If Sister Lucy had made this up out of whole cloth, after the fact, and she was fabricating it, then she wouldn't have fabricated a minor error, or at least an ostensible minor error, which is what people would say. So it would be like saying, let's put it this way, that I'm some minor prophet and I say, JFK is going to go down, November 29th, 1963, which is a week late, of course. And I'd made the prediction all along, but I hadn't published it. And in December of that year, I released, hey, my secret was this. It constitutes this content. JFK goes down November 29th, 1963. And I repeated it, even though it ostensibly was a week late. And there's a reason that she has of explaining why the war actually began 2 months earlier than people assumed. But she repeated it as the point. So it's actually evidence, not contrariwise. It's evidence affirming, sort of like what we said about even her ignorance as to who this Russia was. Yeah.
Right. The lady Russia.
Crazy lady.
Yeah.
Crazy. And
they say Russian ladies are crazy.
They do.
No
Sorry,
offense
Russians.
to our Russians, but
yeah. Gotta be real.
All right, so I'll continue the quote here. We're still in the second secret of Fatima. To prevent this, Our Lady says, to prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. I'll pause there. So she's asking for the consecration of Russia. She's actually asking for two things. Consecration of Russia, and then that's a papal thing, right? A bishop thing, as we'll see. And then the second thing is for the lay people, that's most of us out here, communion of reparation on first Saturdays.
Right.
So that means on first Saturdays for 5 of them, you're making reparations.
It was never clear to me. Did she want that to be a yearly thing? I've never heard someone actually do it once.
Yeah, there's five wounds against the Immaculate Heart, and so there's 5. Right. So it's not necessary, I think, for the laity to do it every Saturday. I think that would be great, but as I've heard, it's always been you do 5 consecutive Saturdays. I think in your life. Maybe I'm off on that. Hit us up in the comments, but I've kind of understood it's all of our obligation to do 5 consecutive Saturdays in honor of the Immaculate Heart. So, but I think a true devotee of Our Lady and Fatima would be doing it every Saturday of their life, if possible. Yeah. But I think the bare minimum is get 5 first Saturdays.
Right.
Get a group in there. So, and this is, the consecration of Russia, we're going to get into a lot, people, in this episode. So I kind of want to save that, Timothy. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
And then she talks about Russia will spread her errors. Would it have been evident in 1917 that Russia would have a bunch of errors to spread throughout the world?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Maybe after Halloween through November 7th of that year, with what went down with the Bolsheviks at Winter Palace and, the forcing out of the last remaining czar. Again, Sister Lucy wouldn't have understood any of this because it all involves geopolitics. The Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks could have been read about by, experts on Russia. But even then, it was a mostly closed society. So not a lot was getting out. We already know she didn't even know what Russia was. So there's essentially no way that she would have the existential understanding that there even was potential trouble brewing later that year in Russia in late 1917. And of course, even the experts in the West, in the Western world, had no clue what fresh hell Russia was about to wreak on the world. No one even knew. No one knew.
Right.
No one knew.
So, and this ties into the next statement, the good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. That's something we haven't seen, per se. Nations annihilated. And then she says, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she shall be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. And so this seems to show that if it's not done, there'll be a delay, there'll be martyrdoms, the Pope will suffer, nations will be annihilated, but eventually the Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Pope will consecrate Russia. Russia will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. So it's interesting. This is not necessarily like the eschaton or eschatology, because life goes on after this. And some people have tried to connect the two, and I'm not quite sure about that. But it seems that life will go on. There will be peace. Russia will somehow be in communion with Rome through this series of events.
Right. One quick thing. People have argued, even though we haven't seen like a nuclear bomb explode an entire nation, they've made the argument that the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the redistricting of Poland throughout World War II, we actually did see entire nations that evanesced from the political map. And of course, so when you put that together, here's the interesting part. When you put millions will die together with whole nations will be vanished from the map, it sounds like it means like a whole nation will, explode like a Schwarzenegger film all at once. But really, both of those things arguably happened separately, before even the halfway point of the 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, people our age remember when we were doing geography as kids, there was just USSR as this giant blob on the map, right? It's only later like, wait, that's a country? All these Eastern European, after the fall of Russia, there's all these new countries that we never learned as kids.
Go, what? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I guess in a sense, those nations disappear. But I don't know. I'm still open to the idea that nations might be annihilated. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know Portuguese. I don't know enough to check these words. If there's someone out there that does and has access to the vision in Portuguese, let us know in the comments, because I'm really curious about that part.
Right.
So that's the end of it. There is this thing in Russian identity amongst the Russian people. There's a manifest destiny amongst the Russians. They think they're special. They know they're special. And the whole world kind of thinks, yeah, there's something about Russians. When we look at their literature, the arts, architecture, and their role in history. And they're kind of this bastard child of Europe. They're part of Europe, but they're not. Right. And I don't think they ever will be fully European. Even in our current, this year and month of geopolitical, in America, all we've been fighting about is, did Trump get elected through Russian interference? Like, we're still talking about these dastardly Russians.
Yeah. No, they like you said, I really like that you say they, along with the U.S. in the last 200 years, have something like a manifest destiny. I mean, they're not, I'm sorry, all cultures weren't built the same. All nations can't say this. You can't make the same argument about Belize or something like that. But the Russians are literally not half. They're part European, west of the Caucasus. They're part Asian, east of the Caucasus. They've got this famed kind of the genius of the Russians. They've got the greatest novelist of all time in Dostoevsky.
They're great at chess.
They're super, super great at chess. Yeah, they're just there is something there that's undeniable.
Khabib meet Conor McGregor.
Right. Khabib meet Conor McGregor. Yeah.
And we've talked about Rocky before. Like, even in that, like, which Rocky is it where he fights the Russian? What is that, 4?
Number 4, Ivan Drago. It's Ivan Drago. I will crush you. Yeah.
I mean, we all remember that because there is this great tension. Like, in the world right now, it's really USA, Russia when it comes to like political aggression and power. And it's really been that way since, I don't know, 40s, 50s.
Right. Since even before World War II.
Second War,
But the funny thing is that's so remarkable. We don't have to comment on it forever, but we had, it was that way. The two superpowers in the Cold War. Now the relation, the rapport born between the two nations is much more difficult to characterize. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of subtexting beneath the surface, but still it's not a Cold War. And we still remain the two superpowers for 10 or 15 years of triumphalism. After the fall of the USSR, we figured out they're gone. But look how quickly they recovered. And look how quickly, even if they haven't fully recovered morally, the nation was just devastated morally with generations of atheists. Look how quickly they at least rose to world prominence again. There is a manifest destiny, like you said, not just us.
And they know it. They believe it. I mean, we're kind of dating this video discussion, but, it was 2 weeks ago that the Patriarch of Moscow broke communion with the Patriarch of Constantinople.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's
that's a big deal.
Active schism because Moscow's like, yeah, we're Eastern Orthodox, but maybe we don't need Constantinople.
Right. That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Kirillov. Yeah. That's crazy. And the thing about the Russian Orthodox Church is that Dostoevsky had said, look, again, prophetically, he said, look, whether or not the Orthodox Church is what reigns as the ideology, the Russian ideology, the one thing they cling fast to or not, will determine what we do with our great Russian passion and genius. And we'll either turn fully back to the Orthodox Church, the liberals of the 1840s in Russia gave way to a more radical generation of the 1860s, which is what all these Russian authors, Turgenev, Dostoevsky, and the like, were writing about. It will go one way or the other. The 1860s, much like the 1960s in America, will produce fruit one way, or will either be really bad or really good. A full return to the faith of their fathers, the Russian Orthodox faith, or a full turning away. Whereas the 1840s liberals were kind of bourgeois, as the nihilist Bazarov says in Fathers and Sons. You're kind of halfway doing it. We're going all the way. So this is what happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, leading up to the 20th century. So it was predictable if you knew anything about the Russian ideology that fed the Bolshevik Revolution. But no one knew how successful it would be, because no one understood what this dialectical materialism was in full until the Soviets brought it to fruition. No way Sister Lucy knew,
Yeah. I mean, just think about, Russia brought communism, and then she spread it to Germany, and then she spread it to China, and she spread it to North Korea, and she spread it to Vietnam, and she spread it to Cuba. And you think of, we're Americans. I know that, only 60, 70% of our viewers are American, but all of our problems as Americans for the past 70 years have been putting out these bonfires that Russia has lit around the world. Vietnam, Cuba, China, North Korea. I mean, all of this happened via Russia.
Yeah.
Even in Africa, these, the places where they're running around with AK-47s.
Yeah.
Who put those Kalashnikovs in those African hands?
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's right.
The Russians.
That's right.
There's, the symbol, the weapon against, or that's, aligned with the Soviets is the Kalashnikov, the AK-47. Every movie, on the news too. So all of our problems.
Osama bin Laden. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In even the Arab world, where was that coming from? Russia.
Yeah. Firing them at the sky. Yeah. The Afghanis. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So real quick, I want to go through the conversion of Russia, because not a lot of people know exactly the details about that. Of course, the tradition is that the St. Andrew the Apostle is the apostle of Constantinople, and by extension, Russia, and that there's traditions that Andrew went as far as what we know as the Ukraine and evangelized there and converted people. So Russia is going to claim Andrew as their apostle. Patron, proto-patriarch, right? And it was really around Kiev that in the 9th century missionaries are going there. And we have St. Cyril and Methodius. They're there in the mid 800s. And they're converting the people, and they translate the Bible into Old Church Slavonic. Also the liturgy into Old Church Slavonic. And a lot of people say, this is the vernacular. It is in a way the vernacular, but Old Church Slavonic is not a vernacular language. There's never been a Slav that walked around speaking Old Church Slavonic. It's a kind of a compilation, I've been told, of Slav language that can be commonly understood. People could worship in it. People could read the Bible. And of course, it becomes a major tradition and influences the Slavic languages, just like Martin Luther's German Bible began to solidify what German meant 500 years ago. So, and one reason for that is these people were never incorporated in the Roman Imperium. They don't, unlike England or France or Spain, that was part of the Roman patrimony. They're not. And so that's kind of the argument for St. Cyril and Methodius bringing in Slavonic.
Like you said, they're European, but they're not European. They're the only European superpower nation that was not at one point part of the Roman Empire. That's a good point. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
So it's unique. And of course, Cyril and Methodius were in communion with Rome, friendly with the Western Church. So it's not like it's a diss or anything like that.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, it begins to spread. And right now there's a huge debate between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians claim is, hey, look, we're the original converted people. Kiev, not Moscow, not St. Petersburg. That wasn't the capital. That wasn't the hub of Cyril Methodius's missionary work. It was Kiev.
Yeah.
We in the Ukraine are the real grandfathers of Christianity amongst the Russians, the Slavs. And so there's this, that's really why the Patriarch of Moscow is out of communion with Constantinople at this instant, is because they don't want to recognize a Patriarch of Ukraine, Kiev.
Right.
Because that's basically saying, well, Moscow's second fiddle, because Kiev is the historic site. And so that's what's important about it. So over time, you have, I don't want to go too much into it, but you have their king, Vladimir. He's the Prince of Kiev. He's baptized. The nobility, the dukes begin to be baptized over time. The local peasants, local pagans, they receive baptism, and the Russians become Christian, and they become not all of them. Out east you have Muslims, and in the south, but the Russian people are fervent believers.
Right.
They fight in this. And I saw something interesting. I don't know if you've seen this, Timothy, but one of the members of the Portuguese royal family, I think it was the heir apparent, and I don't know his name. He wrote Lucia asking what Russia being converted means. Does it mean the Russians will become Roman Catholic?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
really?
She wrote him back, and she said, to me, the meaning of Our Lady was not that they would become Roman Catholic. They would continue to be Russian Orthodox, but in communion with Rome.
How does that work? In full communion with Rome?
Yeah, full communion with Rome.
Interesting.
Like an Eastern Catholic. So the idea is, it's not like they're going to tear down their cathedrals and rip down their iconostases and start having Vatican II.
We don't want them to.
Yeah,
I don't want them to.
They're not going to have the Novus Ordo, and they're not going to have the traditional Latin Mass. They're going to have the Old Church Slavonic liturgy, the Russian patrimony, the Russian icons, the Russian cathedrals, the Russian vestments, and all that. But they will be in communion with Rome. That's a private correspondence from someone in the royal house of Portugal. This is like, I think in the 80s or 70s or something.
I never heard that.
He asked specifically what is meant by the conversion of Russia, and she responds, I understand the intention to be not that they would become Roman Catholic, but that they would be in communion with Rome.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
When's that going to happen?
Well, Our Lady tells us.
Yeah.
When the Pope consecrates Russia. I think that's a good segue. So there's a number of consecrations, entrustments of Russia or of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. 1942, Pius XII entrusted the world to the Immaculate Heart. He did it again in 1952, and he mentioned the peoples of Russia. So that's pretty good. John Paul II in 1984 entrusted the world to the Immaculate Heart. Benedict XVI did it in 2010, and Pope Francis did it in 2013. But there's a lot of people, Timothy, who say none of these count. They don't work.
Well, right. So there are different elements in terms of what it requires. In 52, right before Pius XII sent his emissary Schweigel, by my little chronology in my brain here, he did this entrustment, and he did mention Russia. So why wasn't that sufficient? Because the other element was missing in that case. It had to be in front of all the bishops of the world, or
so
at
it's
least
the Pope and the bishops.
Pope and the bishops. You need, I don't know if every last one has to be there, but it's got to be on behalf of all the bishops in the world. And Pius XII, who had a starkly different equipoise with respect to Russia than did, say, his successor, was John the 23rd, not a Fatima fan. So why did Pius XII only go halfway? Well, he did the half that everyone had been complaining about that had been missing previously, which was Russia wasn't named specifically. But now all the bishops weren't present. So there's something I'll point out just in all those failed attempts that you mentioned, 5 or 6 of them there. There's something diabolical even in that. The fact that it's not that hard to get the bishops of the world together and say Russia and say to the Sacred Heart of Mary. It's weird.
As I understand it, you don't need to get an airline ticket for every bishop.
No, you don't.
All you have to do is you have to say, hey, look, on May 13th, to celebrate Our Lady of Fatima, I in Rome at, and you just pick the time, noon Rome time, I am going to have a mass. And at the conclusion of the Mass, I am going to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart. And I ask, under obedience, all bishops of the world to do the exact same thing on that date. And I encourage all the laity to come to the cathedral. And every bishop on earth is going to celebrate Mass in solidarity with me and pray with me and consecrate the Russian people to the Immaculate Heart of Mary.
Right. Boom. Done.
I think that's all that needs to be done. You don't need to have every bishop in the world in St. Peter's Square. It's kind of ridiculous.
No.
And she doesn't ask for that. But
yeah, it's so strange. I just take a moment out there, viewers, listeners, and pause and realize that this has been failed five or six different times. Oh, I think we're going to talk more specifically about the last. The penultimate attempt to do this, but it's strange because it's not that hard a thing to do. It's not like, hey, Our Lady didn't say, hey, if you want world peace, that's fine, but I want the 85-year-old Pope to do, 600 push-ups in 25 minutes, right? That's something you can fail at.
We're talking about something that takes 2 to 3 minutes max,
right?
And all it takes is just basically right now an email or a tweet to all the bishops,
right?
And give them 6 months lead time. They can reserve space in their own cathedral and get her done after Mass. May 13th or October 13th. Pick a suitable day,
right? And
get everybody excited about it. Maybe declare a Marian year, and then at the conclusion of it or at the beginning of it, May 13th, October 13th, have a Mass,
right?
And then have a prayer of consecration. All the bishops and the Pope read it simultaneously or on the same day.
Right. Before we go too far away from it, did you want to say something about the speculation? There's a lot of broad ecumenical Christian speculation, that particularly among the Protestants, on the meaning of Russia, the broader meaning of Russia for fitting Gog and Agog. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this manifest destiny of Russia and how Russia is either just, a crazy, horrible woman, punishing the world, a vodka-crazed Russian lady, right? Or Russia is this, sweet, devout, wholesome Russian lady who's in the church lighting candles before the icon of Christ. It's like, we have these two versions of Russia, and why do we have this sense, and why do the Russians have a sense that they are a powerful people with the manifest destiny? And some people have identified the Russian people with the people of the North and with the biblical Gog and Magog, right? Which is this northern amorphous exotic people who can be extremely savage. I cover Gog and Magog a little bit in my podcast series on the Book of Revelation, the commentary. I'll put that in the right corner. Yeah. So there might be something biblical to it. I don't want to go and say definitely, because again, it's a loose application, and what is Gog and Magog, and what is it? Who is it? I'm not quite sure.
You're saying that all Russian ladies, if I'm hearing you right, are either Sonia from Crime and Punishment or Grishenka from Brothers Karamazov. Right. We're going to get angry tweets from the Orient.
Molotov cocktails coming this way.
That's right. Yep. Love the Russian jokes. Yeah.
Yeah. On the consecration of Russia, there are two problems, and there's two reasons, as I've read the literature. as to why the consecration of Russia has not been done. I want to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about the errors of Russia, communism, feminism, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But the two reasons why it hasn't been done is, first of all, there is a complaint by bishops and theologians that something cannot be consecrated to non-God, non-divine. So we consecrate things to God like chalices and holy water and all kinds of priests, all kinds of things, virgins as nuns. So the idea of consecrating something, setting it aside for God makes sense. And they say, well, you can't consecrate something to the Immaculate Heart of Mary because she's a creature. That's an interesting theological point. So what we've seen in a lot of these is the word entrustment. In fact, many advisors to John Paul II said he could not do a consecration to Russia, that this is a theological error promoted by the children of Fatima. We could only entrust to Our Lady. We could consecrate to Jesus. Now, this is not true because, as we've mentioned in the beginning of this and other videos, all of anything that's done to Our Lady is to Jesus through Mary.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's not a terminal consecration in that it ends with Mary. Right?
Right.
The Immaculate Heart is connected to the Sacred Heart. The Immaculate Heart of Mary is inside the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Right? They're linked up. So when we consecrate Russia to Mary, we're consecrating it to God through Mary.
That's right.
Through Our Lady of Fatima. Right. So that theology is just misplaced.
Well, I think it was a stalking horse for, I'm giving these people the intellectual benefit of the doubt, Vatican theologians. And I'm going to say that they were just being actually, in this case, dishonest rather than stupid. This is just a stupid misunderstanding of Mary, the likes of which you get from, well, I don't want to be mean, but this is more like a Protestant criticism of Mary. It's so simple that, how many times can we say it's to Jesus through Mary, to Jesus through Mary, to Jesus through Mary? I think in terms of out of the mouths of Vatican theologians, I think it was a stalking horse for something called Ostpolitik, which we should probably talk about.
So that's the second point. So the first point is they said, hey, you can't consecrate to Mary. You have to entrust to Mary. Okay. The second one is Russia's really powerful. They're going to be offended if all the bishops on earth, including bishops in Russia, have this big day, where we all come together and we all pick on Russia. We're like, oh, Russia's so bad. We need to consecrate Russia to Mary.
That's
and so the Russians are going to get mad and they're going to strike back. So this is, I think, the real reason. And it kind of goes back to John the 23rd.
Right.
We don't want to, the Russians are a giant beehive. We don't want to poke it with a stick.
Right.
Just let it be.
Yeah. Imagine all of your neighbors in your entire neighborhood getting together and they all knock on your door and they're like, hey, we want to come help you clean up and make your house less stinky. You'd be like, oh,
and do some yard work. Yeah.
Yeah. Do some yard work. I'm the smelly kid in class. Like everyone bought me deodorants for Christmas. It would sting a little bit, come on, you're Russia. You're going to, that I don't think they cared that much in terms of national pride at that point. They might've had something like international pride, but they knew what they were trying to do. Mm-hmm. Also, there was allegedly at Vatican II, there was a lot of talk in terms of Ostpolitik about not offending.
Define that for people. Ostpolitik.
Ostpolitik is not meant is tripping over the church tripping over itself, not to mention Soviet politics.
Yeah, Eastern.
Even when it comes to Russia in particular. So it's like if you told me not to mention, or I said to you, hey, let's not mention.
It's like the stinky kid at school, but he's like he hit puberty 5 years before all of us. He's like 6'4". He stinks. He's got a beard, and you're like, yeah, we need to get that guy deodorant and clean him up, but let's not say it out loud or we're going to get beat up.
Yeah, exactly. That's Ostpolitik.
We're getting deep. Analogies.
It's this stinky kid. Yeah. No, the analogies are they save time, but yeah, it was also about not offending the Eastern Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox Church. From if you take seriously what they were saying at Vatican II,
it's not really ecumenical,
right?
To say the biggest non-Catholic Christian jurisdiction on planet Earth needs Rome to consecrate it to the Virgin Mary Theotokos. They aren't going to like that.
They're not into it. No. Okay. Yeah. But and so on what was it? Was it in May 1984 when John Paul II did the consecration? Was it?
He did
was
entrustment.
It
He did entrustment.
Entrustment. Okay.
Yeah.
When he did the entrustment to Our Lady, he did it on behalf of the world. He did not mention Russia. Now, according to several eyewitness accounts, one of them being the recently deceased Father Gabriel Amorth, who died 2 years ago. This involved a last-minute bull rush by several of JP2's advisors right before he got up to the podium and made the entrustment. And they said, do not, he said that their tone was something more than dulcet.
Right.
And they're saying, you can't do this, Holy Father. Do not mention Russia. You have to say something other than Russia. And according to Father Gabriel Amorth, JP2 really wanted to. Whether or not this is just pro JP2 apologetics for falling short of the mark or not, I won't speculate. But he tells the story very starkly. You can go look it up. It's interesting. I mean, all of this is interesting.
Yeah.
Most interesting stuff you can talk about. But yeah, it was a last minute thing where he allegedly had in his heart an authentic desire to do the real consecration, and it got downgraded for the 5th time.
Yeah.
It's wild. It's wild. It's so easy to do.
I had heard, it was reported that not only was Russia removed from the text, but the word consecrate was also modified.
Okay.
To entrustment. And so, and this happened in 1984, and most people in the Fatima discussions will say John Paul II fulfilled the second secret.
Right.
And it happened in 1984. And they'll say, look what happened after 1984. Berlin Wall. Right. Communism drops. Like, to them, it's so obvious that John Paul II in 1984 does this act of entrustment, and boom, things start happening. I, as a Catholic and a Fatimist, I'm like, look, he obviously did something to the world. He made an act of entrustment. A pope did it. It's not for nothing.
Right. Which tends to get lost.
If he blesses water, it becomes holy water. I mean,
right.
He obviously, as the Vicar of Christ, unlocked graces for the world. And I would even say, things that happened in Russia and even in the rest of the world, in Germany, likely were the positive fallout of that act of entrustment. So I'm not saying he did it and nothing happened. It was a dud.
Right.
Something happened. But was it the actual prescribed act of consecration from the second secret of Fatima? I would say no. Was it a good, positive thing for the world? Absolutely, yes. I'd love it if the Pope every year consecrated the world or entrusted the world or whatever he wants to do to the Immaculate Heart. It's going to be positive. But in order to get the results Our Lady said, which is, for a period of peace and Russia be converted, it's going to take something all the way, 100%.
Yeah. So our viewers understand, if you start talking about this consecration by JP2, you are wading into some of the hottest political waters that swirl around the Fatima issue, and that there's
in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, in the Catholic Church, several facets of this are controversial. This is among the most. Just last year, my friends at Catholic Answers, lots of good work is done there. I published an article in this issue of the magazine. There's an article called "Oh, those Fatimists," as in "Oh, those crazy Fatimists." And again, I have many friends there. They do good work. I consider Catholic Answers to do a lot of good work. Fatima is one of the issues where I would respectfully disagree very starkly. They were essentially saying it was an article. There's an article by Jimmy Akin and one by Michelle Arnold, both of whom do generally good work, I think. But I had to sharply part ways when it came to whether or not the consecration of Russia was done. I think both of them, in different ways, were taking a shot at the critics of the consecration, which involves a spectrum of people. On the far end of the spectrum of those critics of the consecration, you get some of the crazy theories. Again, they give no credit. They say no good was effectuated by this. What is it called again?
Entrustment.
But, with the more moderate voices like Sochi or yourself or what I happen to believe as well is that, look, lots of good came from this. It did have a causal effect
They asked Sister Lucia about it, and she said the Virgin Mary accepted what John Paul II had done.
Right.
And that's why a lot of people say there's two Lucias, which I don't hold to. They say, well, the real Lucia would have never said that. No, I think the real Lucia would say, Mary accepted what John Paul II did. It's kind of like at the wedding at Cana, do whatever he says, and, Christ makes it happen, even though the human ministers are weak and don't do it perfectly. It can be perfected. But is it exactly what she said?
Of course, no. Well, I mean, facially, it's what we call a prima facie case. It is not exactly what she had asked for. And therefore, if a dad tells his son, you better get an A- or above, and he comes with a B+, do you accept this? And he says, I accept that.
Right.
That doesn't mean you get the full effect. It might be barely sufficient, but you don't get all of the benefits from doing it. Yeah. And this is essentially, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but I believe it's Michelle Arnold argues that anyone who requests full obedience, full explicit obedience using these particular words is essentially asking for a spell. And they become like, it's quite an outrageous charge.
Wouldn't that mean that Our Lady's asking for a spell?
Yeah. Well, yeah. But she's saying that I guess Ms. Arnold is leveling the charge that by being an over literal textualist here,
I see.
You're imputing to her like spell like qualities, and it's an outrageous claim. It's not a fair critique.
So here's an analogy. Let's say you're in Rome and you have a sick child, a deathly sick child, and you go to the Holy Father and you say, Father, my child's very sick. Would you please bless my child? And then he says, I'd be happy to. And he takes a step back and he raises his hands and he says, I bless in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, all sick children on earth.
Right,
Amen.
Precisely.
Okay, so did he bless your child? Yes, but I would say, that was great, Holy Father. Can you now bless my child? Right?
Here's a 20. Can you do it better? Can you do a better job?
So it's true. If the Holy Father says, I entrust all nations of the earth to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, did he just entrust Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary? Yes, he did it. He did it. He did it. Did he do it the way that Our Lady asked? No. Was the first part good? Did it bring blessings to the world? Yes. In fact, it brought blessings to other countries. That's wonderful. However, the Fatima vision is second secret, the one we're covering today, is particularly about Russia. Just like as a father, I'm saying, hey, this is my kid who's sick right now. Can you please give a special blessing for him that's particular?
Right. If it were an SNL skit, it would be all the bishops in the world hear that, and it goes quiet, and JP2 goes to the podium and he says, I want a special blessing for all of the countries in the entire globe. And everyone would be like, cool. Okay, good warm up. Can you run that back? Can we do it the right way? Like we're not. And that's funny. You give that analogy. I would always give the analogy. It's like you want a priest to bless your house, and he comes in, he does the whole thing, and he blesses the entire city. You're like, there's this idea of interpretation. Even Justice Scalia used to talk about it. More specific is better. And this holds for geography as well. We need Russia. We need all of those graces, or they did in the 20th century anyway. Liberals would say they need it even more now than when Russia was overtly communist. But you need all of that, like a laser beam. You need it focused on the evils of 20th century Russia. And it was evil. We should talk about just how evil 20th century Russia became.
Let's go back to that. Yep.
Yeah, I'm reading from this great Fatima book. It is not if you're someone that's made uncomfortable by the things that Dr. Marshall and I have talked about, the third secret before, you'd be very comfortable because the dual authors, who are a couple of Polish guys, which are Gregory Zgorny and Janusz Rosikon. They probably butchered their name. I should have just left it as the authors are a couple of Polish guys. But they do not actually touch on the third secret at all, except insofar as to say they believe it's been fully revealed in 2000. So there's a great chapter in this book. I got to give it a plug. It's chapter 6 of the book, and the entire chapter is called Decalogue, and it goes through. And I had to read this to some of my students because they believed that I was being, because they don't know, they're 17. They believed that I was being exaggerative when it came to the evils of communism, of Soviet communism, even Chinese communism, because it doesn't appear to be as evil. But I said, no, this is what the Soviet regime stood for. And it literally goes through commandments 1 through 10, and it shows how the Lenin-Stalin axis of early Soviet Russia specifically attempted to subvert the 10 commandments. The most, and it's surprisingly specific. They weren't just amoralists who were accidentally violating all 10. They specifically went through. They were, for example, when it comes to Commandment 5, they were the first nation on November 18th, 1920, in the world to permit abortion with the full sanction of the law. Right. And they in many cases required it. Many people actually know this. But when it comes to Commandment 6 and adultery, it's wild stuff. The sexual revolution was more nakedly instantiated in Soviet Russia insofar as they said, look, every member of the government should be allowed this amount of access to one another's wives. And when it comes to fornication writ large, which is a violation of a few of the commandments, there was something called public women. Every citizen of the Soviet regime, not even just members of the government, was entitled to 3 public women. This was part of the sexual revolution, nakedly exposed.
Yes.
And it didn't matter whether the women were married, whether the men were married, whether they were.
Because communism has no private goods, including the privacy of spouses.
No.
So, the whole idea that that's my wife or that's my husband. No, you're there. Your sexuality is there for the common good, period.
That's right. That's exactly
Marxism. And they even took it to children. They said that children shouldn't be raised as if they had a mom and a dad. There should be a public raising of children. The children belong to the state, not to the parents. Yeah. And we're seeing that in America. All these things. Yes. Public women, public men. Go ahead.
Without a doubt. Listen to this. The kids, the youth, which included 12, 13, 14, were called komsomols. They were placed in communes where everyone lived and had sex together. In 1924, Felix, I'm not going to say his last name, difficult southeastern Slavic name, president of the Commission for the Improvement of the Life of Children, established the largest such commune in barracks in Bolsevo, where he gathered 1,000 juvenile offenders, of whom 300 were girls aged 15 to 18, who were encouraged to have group sex. The collective coerced people to change partners frequently. The aim of that progressive experiment was to re-socialize the youth and to rear a, quote, Soviet man, a homo sovieticus. They're using the Latin. In June 1918, there was a nudist demonstration in St. Petersburg. Several hundred naked men and women marched along the streets carrying banners saying, "Down with shame." The world's first gay pride parade took place in St. Petersburg on December 19th, 1918. Sergei Merkurov wrote a textbook, The Soviet ABC of Eroticism, for teaching reading and writing. Its pornographic drawings were to encourage illiterate boys to learn the alphabet. So there's a lot of similar stuff happening out here in California. Nancy Pelosi would love this. The term sexual revolution was first introduced into mass circulation by Grigory Botkis, director of the Moscow Institute for Sexual Hygiene. It's a hygienic matter now. By his pamphlet, Sex Ed, Reproductive Rights. Via his pamphlet, The Sexual Revolution in Russia, he wrote that the bourgeois family with a husband and a wife ought to be replaced by the Komsomol commune, where about 20 people had sexual intercourse with one another, as it was only thus possible to reconcile personal feelings with great social tasks. Now, Stalin initiated a move somewhat away from the sexual revolution in 1926, which is interesting. If Uncle Joe, who had tons of concubines and was an amoralist, a hardcore anti-Christian, hated Christian values. If he was like, whoa, the sexual revolution is too wild, and it's what we got 40 years later. And in 1926, he said, we got to step back from this. This is wild, man. And what we're doing, what sexual revolution, what the liberation of women does to women is it introduces a new low for the slavery, the impoverishment of women. It's what we've seen in our country the last 50 years. And as you and I were talking before the camera started rolling, it's remarkable, Dr. Marshall, that this has been passed off successfully before the American people as a positive thing, the sexual revolution. Women, and it exists today in 2018. Women exist at a new level of low, public women, than they've ever been. And this is passed off as feminism, one of the errors of Russia.
Yes. Yeah, we often think of communism, socialism, but this whole idea of wrecking the family, separating children from their parents, no-fault divorce, fornication, even homosexuality, all this was promoted by the early communists in Russia. Yes, they had to kind of, just like they said, okay, well, we can't get rid of all religion. Let's have a little bit religion and control it. Stalin also realized, okay, we can't just have orgies 24/7 in Russia. We can't get anything organized. So we need to kind of take our foot off the pedal a little bit, just like we don't need to destroy every single church. Let's just, put our KGB guys in as bishops and priests so we can kind of control it, because you can't eradicate everything. It has to be gradualist. And that's what happened in America. They didn't come in Stalinist. They came in gradualist.
Right.
Year after year, decade after decade. So in America, we have these giant communist movements that have happened, and it wasn't because people came in with a hammer and a sickle. It was gradualist, and that's how Stalin was more of a sinister genius in that way. And I think our communists and our atheists, violent atheists here in America, your Antifa guy people, they're doing the same thing.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But they're starting to get a little out of control. We're starting to see these naked parades, and it's they're kind of getting a little bit, maybe pushing it too far.
Well, arguably, this is what's happening in American politics nowadays. The last 2 years, the last major presidential election, they've overplayed their hand a little bit. And again, if Joe Stalin said in 1926, this is a wild scene, baby, like this is too, let's walk this back. The many average women having received 20 to 30 abortions. This sounds like the kind of stuff in Russia. And it reminds me of going to the San Francisco pro-life march in January on Roe v. Wade Day, because lots of women are lining the streets saying, I've had this many abortions and I'm proud of it. This is the sexual revolution. This is the era of, I mean, I think we should feel very comfortable characterizing abortion as one of the eras of Russia, not to push off the moral responsibility. Roe v. Wade's an American decision. 60 million lives, the blood of all those babies are on our hands as a nation as well. But in its etiology, in the study of the first causes, abortion counts. Feminism, the evils of feminism, the evils of contraception, all go back to Russia. And look what Our Lady said, they would spread throughout the world. And again, the myopic American, probably in the 30s, 40s, 50s, said, who took Fatima somewhat seriously, would have said, oh, this is all about communism, the political economy of socialism, which is completely evil and, destroys private property. But it's not just that. It's all the sexual stuff that truly corrupts.
We've been lied to in that we think in America, communism is economic.
Only.
We hear the word communism like, oh, it's economics. No.
Right.
Marxism is not just economics. Americans we're just so wrong when we think that way. Marxism is a social revolution. It includes religion, philosophy, family, marriage, ownership, yes. The state owning the means of capital, yes. But that's only one element of it.
One stick in the bundle. Yeah. Absolutely.
You don't just think of money, right, in means of exchange and who owns what. That's not what Marxism is. Marxism is an entire social revolution. It is the atheistic way of bringing about what they perceive as utopia on earth without a heaven to go to after you die. So they're trying to maximize human happiness on earth without any reference to God, heaven, grace, immortal souls, anything. That is Marxism.
There's a great quote in the EWTN documentary on Saul Alinsky called Wolf in Sheep's Clothes. Everyone go out and watch it. But toward the end, about 5 minutes from the end of that film, there's a great quote by Marx about his understanding that what he understands his life as a project to accomplish is non serviam, basically to turn upside down the creation and the creator. And he understands this. You do it best by subverting the family, by turning women against men. Yeah. So he wrote extensively, right? He was a Hegelian philosopher, what we call a left Hegelian. And he did not, like Dr. Marshall said, this is not all about money. This is such the myopic American view. That's one thing. Yeah, I hate that. But I hate other aspects of it as much or more.
Yep. So, I mean, what do you think will happen in the future? I mean, will we see a pope who breaks it down and says, hey, I think we need to revisit this idea of Russia? And yeah, the Russians are going to get mad, but I'm a big boy. I'm a daddy. I can handle one of my kids being upset. Right.
I don't know. It depends who the pope is. If it's, the future pope is Cardinal Burke as Pius XIII. We know what his posture would be, right? He
would do it.
As said, what I love about Cardinal Burke, we talked about this before, is anytime he touches Fatima and the secret bearing of Fatima, he always says, without getting into a whole thing on whether or not Russia has been consecrated. He said this 2 or 3 different times.
Right.
It needs to be consecrated. He's like, I don't want to get called a Fatimite or whatever, and I don't want to delve into those waters, but yeah, let's go ahead and reconsecrate it. Use the term consecration, use the term Russia. Let's implore that the Holy Father does this. We can only assume that if he were Pope, he would do it. It depends who the Pope is, like anything. I mean, personnel is policy. Right. And it's true. Boy, do we know that, after the summer of shame of 2018 as well. Personnel is policy.
Yep.
And if we get the right people in place, then, I think we'll do what even Pius XII, who's usually receives decent marks on the Faithful Catholic report card. Yeah. Even he, who was not anti-Fatimist, he really came up short. Even JP2, who has generally, better marks than bad marks on his pontificate, ended up coming up short. And I think, the case can be made that someone needs to just do it and be brave and let come what may.
Yep. I mean, as the last line, it says, in the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. She doesn't say the whole world. She says Russia.
Right.
And she will be converted. A period of peace will be granted to the world. Timothy, are we living in a period of peace? No.
As is argued by
Is Russia converted?
No way.
No. So that tells me that the Immaculate Heart of Mary has not yet triumphed. And that means that the consecration has not yet happened. That might be an oversimple argument, but it makes sense to me.
To be fair, that I've heard how many churches have reopened in Russia, how it was down to double digits. Now it's in 4 digits of churches back in Russia. So that is data. That's not bad argument making.
Yeah. But as Catholics would say, these are people returning to Christ. Is it the fullness of the Catholic faith? No. But are they adoring the name of Jesus and Mary? Yes. Are they?
I don't know what Putin's got under the hood, but even he talks about it. Even he takes these starkly anti-homosexualist measures. So Russia remains a source of mystery, a source of power and mystery. Let's suffice to say this much. It remains mysterious. It remains important, even as non-formally communist, which I think is interesting, like we said earlier, in and of itself. And I think much is still up in the air. The beautiful part is the end of that secret. It is an eventuality. It is a guarantee that Russia will be, by hook or by crook, whether or not the right actions are taken by the popes or not, between 1917 and question mark year, whenever this period of peace begins, it will be okay. I do think I did say all throughout the 2016 presidential election, this is odd. You have witchcraft playing, that's a different topic, playing a major role in the election. And then you have Russia. These are both aspects of Fatima.
Yes.
It's very interesting, this little day of ours.
Wouldn't it be interesting, all the, we hear about churches in Europe closing and the faith dying and, attendance at mass in some countries like France is under 10% of Catholics. It's just, it's just dying, quick death. Wouldn't it be something if our Lord in his providence shifted the power to Russia?
Yeah.
What if the Patriarch of Moscow was a cardinal and was in, regular conversations with the Pope in Rome, and the church in Russia just exploded and became missionary?
I could see it. It could happen. The prophecy seems to insinuate that something like that will happen. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see. It's very interesting stuff. And we glossed through a lot of the controversy, but I mean, every inch of this is kind of contested by good, faithful Catholics, like Catholic Answers on one side, Sochi on the other, who's more moderate. The fat, Gruner and guys like Chris Farrar on the other side, who are, I think everyone's got something valuable to say. Reasonable minds can differ on this, which you don't hear a lot of people saying that in the church now. We don't know, and it's very complex. It's very mysterious. So why can't we get along somewhat by saying we disagree, but let's disagree agreeably, because it is not clear. It's the stuff of prophecy, people. So, well,
good. Well, I personally think, of the three secrets, this is the most neglected, misunderstood, maybe
without a doubt.
The third is definitely the most controversial and debated. And again, this is a series of three. So the next one, you and I have already done one on Third Secret of Fatima regarding Catholic scandal and all that in the church. But the next one's going to be our official treatment of the third secret. So we'll do another one. So we've already done one. This is two. Three. We'll put it in a playlist on YouTube so you can listen to it. Anything you want to add or close out with?
Just pray the rosary daily, even if you fall asleep doing it, and try to get to those first 5 Saturdays consecutively at least once in your life, not yearly. It's important, and we need it. The world needs it now. It's groaning out for it.
Yep. And I think as Catholics, we can pray for Russia. It doesn't have to be like our number one thing, but we need to pray for the whole world. And in particular, there's something important to the Holy Theotokos, the Blessed Mother Mary. She doesn't come down all that often.
No.
She came down in 1917, had a little youth synod with 3 little kids, and a big part of that was Russia.
No dancing at that one either.
There was no dancing at the youth synod. Well, no, the sun was dancing.
Oh, okay. There it is.
Only the sun. The sun was dancing.
There it is. Yeah.
So, hey, everybody, thanks so much. If you enjoy these videos, hit the subscribe button. When you hit the subscribe button, there'll be a little bell. Hit the bell, and that will notify you every time we put out another video, especially the next one on the third secret of Fatima. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Twitter. Like it. And thanks for watching. Be devoted to Our Lady. Pray the rosary. Go to confession. Don't lose your faith. Try to do, like Tim says, do those 5 first Saturdays. Till next time, God bless.